Once again, just to reiterate the headline, we are learning the St. Louis Fed President Jim Bullard does plan to resign from the Federal Reserve to take over the Purdue Business School here. Some conflicting headlines we should point out about exactly the date that he will be stepping down, but nevertheless, the headline here that Jim Bullard no longer will be heading up the St. Louis Federal Reserve. Kathleen Hayes standing by right now, who covers the Fed and of course has interviewed and sat down with Jim Bullard countless times over the years here. Kathleen, this is a shocker to me. Is it a shocker to you?
Shocker to me indeed. And as a matter of fact, when Jim Bullard took over from Bill Poole at the St. Louis Fed, how many years ago? You guys can catch me up on the details. I did his first television interview with him, and I remember sitting down with Jim, and he'd been there for a long time. He was the director of research, I think, when he took over. And I remember saying to him, we were talking a little. You know, when you make a small talk with someone before the interview starts, and he said to me as he was sitting, he goes, you know, and he meant it. He said, I don't really know why you want to talk to me. And I said, Jim, you'll understand why. And of course, over the years, Jim has been a thought leader. For example, I remember doing a radio interview with him a couple years after, I think, when he took over. And at the time, the Fed had just done the first round of quantitative easing. And he was the first person on the Fed I ever heard say, right after it started, you know, we're going to have to talk about the parameters for quantitative easing, what determines when we do it, how we do it, in case we have to do it again.
So just to reiterate here for our viewers, we are learning that St. Louis Fed President Jim Bullard is planning to step down. And as Kathleen alluded to, he has been there for quite some time, taking over officially as head of the St. Louis Federal Reserve back in '08. But of course, he started his career with the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis all the way back, I think, in the early '90s here, went into academia and then made his way back to the Fed and the FOMC, and now learning, Katie Greifeld, that he will step down at least as soon as August 14th to take over the Purdue Business School.
And reading the press release, we do have a quote from Jim Bullard. He writes, "It has been both a privilege and an honor to be part of the St. Louis Fed for the last 33 years, including serving as its president for the last 15 years. So, Kathleen, obviously quite a tenure there. Talk a little bit about the role that Bullard has occupied at the FOMC.
Thought leader.
Yeah.
He was, take a look at this, this last 3 years, right? Coming out of the pandemic, Jim was one of the first people who made it clear that the Fed was going to have to get much more aggressive. He was one of the first to start talking about needing to front load interest rate hikes. There was a time after 2008, where I think it was around 2015 or 2016, where Jim and Chris Waller, now Board of Governors, right, for the last couple of years, he was Jim's director of research. He was also his graduate school professor. Anyway, they put out this piece talking about there would have to be a regime change to get inflation to move, even get up to 2% and stay there. Again, thought leader. But in terms of this most recent episode, going to have to move more, going to have to move faster, rates are going to have to be higher, and continuing to push in that direction. He obviously, in the end, isn't the only one. But again, Jim has been, I think, a big monetary policy thinker, and in terms of actual policy steps, he has been a major force as well.